everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of my Spider-Man art retrospective video series. Hopefully you've had a chance to watch the first 2 episodes here on YouTube. If not, please go ahead and check those out. I have a playlist that I've created just for these Spider-Man videos to make it easier to find them. But again, I hope you get a chance to see. In the first 2 episodes, first we reviewed Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man, and then The Amazing Spider-Man number 1. So today we're going to look at The Amazing Spider-Man number 2. And again, the goal of this series is to look at the history of the character, and not necessarily just from a story perspective, but really focusing on the art. How did things change? How did the design of the character come about? How did the influence of one artist translate to the next artist who picked up drawing the series over the years? So we're starting at the beginning with the originals, Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man number 3, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Steve Ditko. And we're going to go through the entire book, and I'm going to share my thoughts with you and go over it together. So let's get into it. So here we have the cover to The Amazing Spider-Man number 2. And the first thing I noted on this, of course, is the introduction of another new character, the Vulture. Somebody who's not really thought of, I think, a lot in the pantheon of Spider-Man villains, only because we haven't seen the Vulture in... Well, I apologize. I would say we haven't seen the Vulture in live action. We did with Michael Keaton in the first Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, but very different than this. The Vulture was always portrayed as an old man. He had real wings as opposed to mechanical devices, that kind of stuff. And so I think for a long time was never really thought of as much of a threat for Spider-Man, but obviously very interesting that he would have been really the second major villain introduced in the Spider-Man canon after, of all people, the Chameleon that we saw in issue 1. So again, really interesting. One of my notes that I took here was I really like how much the characters pop off of this cover, and the way that it's done is with the coloring. So it's a great cityscape below, and you kind of lose the detail because it's all this same tone of gray. Now, some of that, of course, is the printing practices of the day. They didn't use computer coloring the way we do today, and so coloring every building separately with lots of shading and texture and stuff would have been almost impossible with the printing technology they had in the day. So what they've done here is given us a gray cityscape below the figures, and then you've really brightly colored them in these greens and then the red. And of course, anybody who has taken, an Art 101 course, you know that on a color wheel, your red and your green are opposite one another. We refer to those as complementary colors. The colors go good together and make each other more vibrant. And so interesting that we've got the red character and the green character at odds. I also wanted to note here, and this is a subject that will come up throughout the video and it was part of my first 2 videos. We see here a Spider-Man that is depicted completely in red and black. Now, we have other colors on the cover here. We have different shades of green, we have yellows, we have the gray, we have this sort of orangey tan yellow down here as well, but no blue. And now whether that's a printing issue or printing choice, or again, is this just emphasizing the fact that Spider-Man's original costume really may have been designed to be red and black. Also, by eliminating the blue, which is a tangent to green, right? Yellow and blue make green, so there's blues in your green tones. This really puts them at odds of pure red versus pure green. So again, could have been a visual artistic choice, could have been an element of the printing choice. We don't want to add another color to our printing process. But again, just something I thought very interesting to note. Um, so let's move on to the first page. So the first page we see here is a splash page. And again, I had noted in our, let me backtrack real quick. Again, you'll notice the ads and you see the paper, the staples, the coloring. So these are scanned versions of the original book. So not a reprint, not a digital comic per se. Somebody took the actual original copy of Spider-Man #2, put it on a scanner, and scanned it. And that's what we're looking at. So this is exactly the way it would have looked like, with some aging, of course, after you had purchased it from the newsstands. So we note the credits here: script Stan Lee, art Steve Ditko. I find that interesting in that, to point out, most artists in comic books work in pairs, or sometimes 3 or 4 people. So usually you split the work. You've got your penciler, so somebody who's just drawing the pages in pencil. They hand off to an inker who embellishes it, adds the feathering, the texture, the detail, the hatching, etc. on all of the inked lines. Then you have a colorist who comes in and adds coloring to the whole thing. Then you have your letterer that comes on top of that and adds all the word balloons in the script and the dialogue. So we do have a letterer here, but all the art is being credited to Steve Ditko. So the piece I don't know is I don't know if he did the colors or not. It's possible, though. I don't know if back then they did that. I would say probably not. It's probably just an uncredited colorist, meaning the pages came in and Marvel had, I believe, some in-house people that did coloring. So it was just sort of a industrial, if you will, just a bunch of people working in coloring. So it's possible they may have been uncredited versus did Steve Ditko actually do the colors. But this does tell me that Steve Ditko did both the pencils and the inks. Again, something you certainly don't see a lot of today, and even odd back then. Jack Kirby worked with a number of different inkers over the years. So pretty interesting of that point. Really nice splash page, gives us a sign of what's to come. Interesting, again, we'll see not spoiler because we're going to look at it, but little look ahead. There's 2 stories in this book, which again, very unusual. Most comics today, all 20 to 22 pages of story in a comic book are a chapter in an ongoing story. Here we have 2 complete start, beginning, middle, end stories within 23 pages of storytelling. So this one with the Vulture, with this splash page, there are only 13 pages of storytelling. So not to say we've wasted a page, but to take one whole page and just dedicate it to a scene that realistically we're going to see later in the issue. This is just another way to capture a reader so that maybe that the cover got them. So they saw the cover and they went, what's this? And again, we're talking about newsstand times, when people would go and sort of, you pick it up off the stand. Do I want to buy this or not? Am I going to spend my change here? And when you open the page, if you open the page to boring setup of a story, that they might put it right back and go to the next one. So this is another way of just, hey, we want you to invest in this book. We've got you with the cover. Boom, here's another exciting. Now you're into 2 pages to turn the page, and hopefully you're going to take it home with you. So an interesting choice, like I said, to go with a splash page with such a finite number of pages available, but again, a great piece of artwork. Similar to the cover, of course, slightly different angle, which is very cool. Again, more of the gray cityscape background where the characters can really pop off, and that's what captures our eye. Not, if you look back, the cityscape, for its simplicity, is beautiful. You have elements of stonework. You can see he's put kind of lines around the windows showing, where it would be bricks or stones. You've got a skylight, a water tower. You've got antennas on the roofs. Some venting from probably, maybe, I guess, air conditioning, something like that. So this is a guy who knows how buildings are put together. The windows are different and varied. It's beautiful with just very simple lines. So something for aspiring artists to look at. You don't have to draw a photorealistic city to be beautiful. If you are drawing cityscapes and buildings, think about deviating, your window sizes, your window style. Some are round, some are square, some are curved on top, bigger, smaller. Just, again, very simple ways of making a background interesting. So here we go. We're going to move on. Now we're back to the storytelling and the setup with this grid framework. I will be referring a lot to the earlier videos I did in case anybody is watching this one but didn't see the earlier ones. But we have talked about this in the previous videos about how this is sort of a holdover from newspaper comic strip style work. You could, again, if you wanted to, you could cut out all 12 of these boxes and put them in a line across this way, and you would have the same story. And again, that kind of comes from that printing in newspaper versus comic book, which is a small sort of magazine, right? So different format. And I think early on like this, they're still kind of figuring it out. Or maybe they're thinking that, if we keep to this grid format at times, maybe it can be reprinted in a newspaper or something to that effect. Spider-Man did have a newspaper strip for decades. Though it wasn't reprints of the comics, it was original content, but same idea. So nothing super exciting, just the setup of the Vulture comes. I love the shadow. It's great. It looks like a real vulture, and it shows you, how the design of the character with, this bulbous head, and he's got this kind of big crazy nose, and the costume with the fluff around really makes him look like a real vulture. So that's very cool. Love Ditko's faces. So really neat. Every face is different. The length of this guy between the nose and his lips versus this guy back here with the mustache, this guy with the glasses. We've got our classic J. Jonah Jameson. He's drawn with these giant eyebrows and, the gray on the sides. Everybody is a unique character in a Steve Ditko comic, and I really appreciate that. So much we fall into the standards of faces are drawn like this, so all the men have basically the same proportions and same face, and you tell them different by what clothes they have, or Peter has glasses, but this guy doesn't, or has curly hair, but the faces themselves are the same. Not with Steve. With Steve Ditko, every character was unique. Interesting, J. Jonah Jameson has his own building, publishing building, and it's Now Magazine instead of what we know as the Daily Bugle. So it'll be interesting to see where that changes over from Now to the Daily Bugle. I guess the idea would be that early on he was publishing a magazine, more like Time Magazine, versus a daily newspaper, which is what it turns into. So kind of interesting there. Also over here on page 3, we see Aunt May giving Peter this camera. And this is the start of Peter Parker taking pictures of Spider-Man to make a living. It's a trope that goes on for decades and decades throughout the history of Spider-Man. And it's a really interesting story technique because it adds an element of how does Peter explain how he gets the pictures of Spider-Man, how does he explain where he was when Spider-Man was there, but he's getting the pictures, but sometimes it gives him an excuse as well to be around the action and doing stuff because he could say, I was there taking pictures. So very neat. And then nice little element here. So this is Aunt May is getting Peter his uncle's old camera, and then we see this picture of Uncle Ben. And again, to remind us of why Peter's doing what he's doing. In Amazing Fantasy 15, Uncle Ben dies, and Peter takes on that responsibility, feeling that it was his fault. So it tells us that, Ben's not here anymore. A really subtle little piece, but a nice add, that doesn't have to be there, but it's a subtle element of visual storytelling that I really, really like. Let's see, let's keep going. More grid storytelling. I mentioned this before. It doesn't carry all the way through all the time, but when Peter is in as Spider-Man, so when he's being Spider-Man, we find that the camera angles are typically much more exciting. Now, that doesn't necessarily play over here as well in the fight scene, but like the first time we see him fully ready to go in costume, now he's putting it on here, but he's out in the field, there's that nice angle to the camera. And that, again, just makes things a little more interesting, a little different, tells us that we're going to be seeing something different. Again, really nice, subtle visual storytelling. Again, with the shadow of the Vulture, I really like that. Like, he's throwing these notes tied around rocks to tell everybody what he's going to do, because he's so cocky on what he's going to do next. So he's throwing these rocks to these windows of, the radio, J. Jonah Jameson's magazine, the police. Now, this one, and each one is slightly different. So you show him throwing one, then we show the shadow, and one's going through, so it's just insinuated or hinted at what's happening, but we know, we read it. And then here, this one coming from the opposite angle of coming through the window. So really nice, again, subtle storytelling, but a great way of showing the same thing 3 different times, but in 3 different ways, so it's not boring. So that's really cool. Spidey underestimates his opponent. Vulture gets the drop on him right away, which, as we know, later probably wouldn't happen. Spidey has a spider sense that warns him of danger, sort of like, a sixth sense or eyes in the back of his head. So the idea of the Vulture looping around and kicking him from behind probably in later issues just wouldn't have happened. This face, I love this face. That is so cool. From the mouth, the lines in the neck and around the eyes, you really tell, like, this guy, he looks old, but he looks like a Vulture. The ears being slightly bigger, but just what a great character face. Really, really enjoy what Steve Ditko does with those faces. Amazing. So Vulture has left Spidey in a water tank to drown, and here's something we find, a trope that happens a lot, and this gets addressed in this series, is his web shooters failing on him. So, right, he's gonna just shoot a web up to the top and break through, and he forgot to put web fluid in, so he's all out. And now he's got to figure out a way out. So he's got to use his powers in a different way. So he's got to use his super strength to propel himself through the water in a way that a regular human couldn't do. But this comes into a trope of Spider-Man's, one of his greatest weapons sometimes becomes his greatest liability, is his web shooters. In fact, I saw a video clip of Stan Lee just the other day talking about this in the movies. So if you remember the original Tobey Maguire early 2000s Spider-Man, he was able to shoot webs through his hands. It was part of the changes that made him into Spider-Man. And it was very controversial at the time. Having organic web shooters is what they called them versus the mechanical ones from the comic book. Very controversial. So when they went to the next series of Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield, they showed him, they brought back the mechanical web shooters and showed him creating them. And the clip from Stan Lee mentioned the fact that why the mechanical web shooters were so important was because you could always write drama in that what happens when Spider-Man's web shooters fail him. So he runs out of web fluid. It gets jammed up. It gets broken. So all of a sudden now the hero is at a disadvantage, which is what makes a hero all that more heroic, is when they overcome that adversity. And that's what the mechanical web shooters allowed. So I thought it was really interesting that I just happened to see that video the other day, and here we are in the story where we see Spider-Man's web shooters failing him for the first time because in this case, he forgot to fill up the fluid. And again, this is a trope that goes through Spider-Man, throughout the history of the character. So he jumps out and manages to save himself and get out of the water tower and go back home. Again, now a lot of exposition, some story stuff. He's working on how he's going to defeat the Vulture using not just his superpowers, but his natural-born intelligence. So very cool. And then here we go. Here's another introduction of the Spider-Man mythos, is his utility belt. And a lot of people probably don't know that Spider-Man has a utility belt the same way that Batman has a utility belt. Underneath his belt, is where he puts his camera. So he eventually, not here, but down. He does say he's going to buy a miniature camera to attach to the buckle, so he can just take pictures right from his waist, I guess. So it's like the first GoPro. He eventually puts in a signal so he can shine a light that has his Spider-Man logo, the face in the red. And then around the sides of the belt are cartridges, extra web fluid cartridges for his web shooters. So you can just pop one out, pop a new one in, he's ready to go. And that is something that, again, sometimes gets lost with the character, that he has that kind of stuff. But I think is a really fascinating thing, because it's not visual on the outside of his costume, which I like. It was a way to put it in without destroying that streamlined silhouette of what Spider-Man is. If he had had a bulky belt around the outside of his costume, I think it would have made him look less graceful, maneuverable, and that's a big part of his power set, is his speed, his agility, his ability to bend and move in ways that other people can't. And so we see that here. A great way to add some technology, because Peter's a smart guy, but not ruin how the character works. One more thing I wanted to point out here. Again, so I talked about it at the cover. Spider-Man is red, and then the other parts of his costume are solid black. Here again, throughout so far, we've seen it's been colored in this sort of grayish color. Now, it might have been a dark blue, and we may be seeing the aging of the ink, right, as it has faded over the years, so that it now looks gray. However, there are other blues in the comic all over the place, right? We see light blues on the building. Peter's suit is this bright blue that we see in comics all the time. There's blue color in his cabinet there, in his room, on the cityscape, etc. I think we have a back here. Of course, all the water is a very bright blue. So, again, I just question, is it gray because that's what we're trying to do, is show that the highlight on a black costume would be gray, versus the shadows on a blue costume would be black. So just something to keep our eyes open to and talk about as the series continues to go on. Hard to say. Again, I'm still leaning towards, I held out for years that if somebody had asked us, what color is Spider-Man's costume? He goes, red, blue. Did it start out as red and black? The evidence really seems to point that way, and I'm the more that I review these at this kind of in-depth level, the more I believe in that theory, that the costume was really planned. It was meant to be black and red, but we'll see. So here we go. Peter brings his photos that he has to J. Jonah Jameson for the first time. Another trope. right? He works for Jonah. Jonah mistreats him, yells at him, screams at him, underpays him, undervalues him, all that kind of stuff. So J. Jonah Jameson is becoming a much bigger supporting character beyond just the kids around Peter in high school. So Flash Thompson, of course, being the redhead who his school nemesis. But as time goes on, we'll see more. But interesting that Jonah has been he was introduced in issue number 1, and now we see him even more too here. So probably the earliest real supporting character, I would say, of Spider-Man. So some more storytelling. The Vulture is going to come rob these jewels. Everybody knows. Peter has to pretend, or just he knows the robbery's coming. The Vulture's going to be here, so he's got to head off when everybody makes fun of him because he's not sticking around. Again, we go to more of this exposition storytelling bridge to get us to the next action and fight scene, and they go back to this sort of grid to just move us through it, which is fine. Peter changing into Spider-Man, he's ready to go. Now, as soon as he's in the full Spider-Man costume, the angles become much more interesting. Great down shot as he climbs up this building. Very reminiscent of Amazing Fantasy 15, the first time he climbs a building. Kind of has a similar down shot as he climbs up the corner. Here again, he's at the building, and we see it's kind of tilts. Nice foreshortening shot. So again, foreshortening, for anybody who's not aware of that term, as something comes towards you, it becomes shorter. Like the objects themselves stack on top of each other. So so my hand goes like this, the fingers are much shorter if you're trying to measure them than if my hand is like this. So because they are going back in space. And that's what he's done here with the Vulture to give us really nice depth. So you have the Vulture in the front, and then a building, and then another building behind that. You can tell by the overlapping there, and then Spidey, and then City behind that as well. So in a panel that's only a couple of inches square. I don't know if this was drawn at 2-up. So I think I mentioned earlier, again, in one of my earlier videos, when creating comics today, comic pages are drawn on 11-inch by 17-inch paper inside of a 10.5 by 15-inch square. So there's a border all around, and then everything is drawn inside that, and then it's reduced down to that comic book size. So way back in the day, some people drew what was called 2-up. So instead of 10 by 15 or 10.5 by 15, I guess it'd be twice as big. So it'd be like 21 by 30. So it'd be really, really big, and then just reduced down twice as much, so that they could draw, really large size, a lot of details, and find that compressed. I don't know what the case is with these originals. Are they 2-up or are they just the 11 by 17? I don't know. But either way, this is a panel. Let's pretend it's the 10.5 by 15. So that means at best it's 5 by 5. Real life drawing, 5 by 5, something, like this. And then reduced down. That's a lot to put into a 5-inch by 5-inch panel. But again, managed to pull out multiple layers of distance to do that. So great story technique there. We have some nice perspective here. So kind of 1-point perspective where everything is going back to a center point behind Spidey in this bottom panel. And all the city lines and everything go back down to that 1 point. Really focuses and funnels the viewer's eye right to that center and that point. Very, very nice. Let's see here. Let's go to the next page. My note, I put dynamic even in the grid format. So using the grid still, and this is where the grid is used to show time, to show moments, beats. So all this is happening in split seconds, right? So there we go. So Spider-Man is sensing the Vulture behind him in the first one, as he should have in the earlier. He gets knocked back off the ledge, but so in that next second off the edge, he shoots a web onto the foot. He pulls closer so that he can grab a hold of him. The Vulture tries to kick him, and then Spidey uses the gadget that he's built to disable the Vulture's wings. Spidey jumps off. They begin to fall. He webs himself, and the Vulture slowly drifts down to the roof, where the fall stuns him, and the police pick him up. So all this is happening, boom, 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 boom. Now, with other kinds of comic panels, for example, let's go back. These things, there's time in between some of the panels. So like, to look at this page, these men are walking. This happens immediately. The Vulture pops out of the manhole, grabs this case. But then, now we see him and he's flying through this sewer tunnel, and then he comes out through the subway. There's time in between those two things. They don't happen instantly between them. And then you cut, and it says, meanwhile, also here, a short time later. So there's time in between those. So that's where it's not as, in my opinion, the grid doesn't work as well. Here, though, this is all happening in an instant. And it's one action after the next action, and each panel moves into the next one in terms of the action. So this is where the grid can really help you with pacing of your story if you have a lot of action. So here we go down. The Vulture is captured and arrested by the police. Spider-Man has gotten a bunch of photos that he thinks are going to be worth a lot of money. He's got his gadget that disabled the Vulture's mechanical wings. So he's like, hey, this is great. If I'll keep this around in case. And he has his money, and everything seems to work out for Spidey and Ann, which is rare. I did note that, again, this is about the closest that we have in this issue to a close-up. There's sort of three layers of distance, so close, mid, far, or long, in terms of what we call the shots. A lot of the terminology and how we talk about comic books is very similar to camera, film, movie, TV kind of stuff, meaning that artist is really like a film or TV director. So you have mid shots like these other ones where Jonah and Peter are talking, Aunt May. You have a long shot which shows the Vulture from head to toe. We could have pulled back if you'd pulled back even further and maybe seen him behind bars, that would have been an even longer shot. And then you have this, which is a close-up, and to be honest, it's pretty close, especially for this time, which I really like because we don't see a lot of these again in this grid format. So very, very nice image there. I really like this. It seems like by issue 2 here, Dicko has really gotten a great sense of the pattern and how it works and how it bends around his body. This, to me, is very quintessential Spider-Man. So we'll see the style change as other artists come in throughout the series, but very quintessential Spider-Man image there. So that's the end of the first story of this issue. But there's a whole nother story. So that's 13 story pages with a splash page that we've just seen. And then we flip the page, and here's part 2. So again, very interesting. I talked about this in the other videos as well. You don't see this anymore. It's rare that you have multiple stories in one book. Like I said, in today's comics, you typically will have 22 to 24 pages of story, but it's a one chapter or sometimes even part of a chapter of a longer ongoing story. So here we have 2 complete stories done in just 23 pages of storytelling. So it makes me wonder if the plan was to to put Spider-Man stories in Amazing Fantasy for several issues, because Amazing Fantasy is an anthology, meaning there's several different stories of several different characters. So let's do 4 or 5 small Spider-Man stories. We'll put them in Amazing Fantasy, so maybe 15, 16, 17, 18. And then if it gets popular enough, we'll spin it into his own comic. But the reaction to Amazing Fantasy 15 was so big, they couldn't wait. And so now you have these smaller anthology stories being packaged together as single issues. Just my speculation. I don't know that to be true one way or the other. I don't know any way to validate that. If anybody is a comic historian that watches this and knows, drop me a comment and let me know if you know some of the details about it specifically. But again, I'm just sort of speculating. But let's get into this one. The Tinkerer. Interesting. And again, another splash page. So we could have used a page of storytelling maybe, but we've used a full splash page. And the thing I like about this splash page is this lighting. It's great stuff. So he's shooting this energy beam, whether it's electricity or whatever it's supposed to be. But obviously it's bright. It casts this massive shadow of the figure behind him. And the way that he's done this feathering on the, I guess, this sort of stone behind him to show like the light is here. I'm pointing at something you can't see. This is the center, and as you go, the stones get darker and darker around, so it's sort of, the light is wrapping up the wall and fading as it gets farther from the center. Really, really nice use of that technique. I really like it. It's very easy to see, like, you can see here in the next page in these, again, storytelling. Peter's in science class, and this is all just to get the story moving. There's very limited shading. You have like some shadows on the back of this guy, but you look at like Peter, there's no cast shadows. There's no shadow under his chin. None of the characters like that. There's no shading in the background at all. It's kept much more simple. So to see this more dynamic lighting in the splash page on the other side, I really enjoy that. So we've got the setup and again the grid storytelling. Same here. I said this. So this is the Tinkerer here in panel 2 of page 2, and man, look at that face. That is a character design that's right out of the old EC comics. Like, he looks like he could hang out with the Crypt Keeper or those kinds of characters. So crazy, but unique, right? So right away, there's no doubt, even though in the story he's seems like he's being pretty nice to Peter to start with, he's got ulterior motives, we find out. And you kind of knew that as a reader going in, even without the splash page. You see this face and you go, that creepy guy's up to no good. So I love it. I love that face. Great design. Very, very cool. Also, I note here that Peter, this might be the first time, and I didn't go back to look in Amazing Fantasy 15 or issue 1 to be confirmed, but I think this might be the first time that we see, when Peter's spider sense goes off, that half of his face is Spidey. So that's the visual representation, not just the lines that come off his head, but this also really helps us to know that, hey, he's sensing something that is going to, is danger, or that Spidey needs to be aware of. So I think this might be the first time we see that. I don't know for sure. Just from a story element, it's very interesting. Over time, like, his spider sense is picking up electrical signals, but and that's how he knows later that there's this alien technology in this radio, because he can sense the electrical signals. They really end up using the spider sense for all kinds of stuff. It really becomes a deus ex machina storytelling tool to get Spidey knowledge of whatever he needs to know, right? So interesting. Cool alien design too. Very humanoid, other than the face. 5 fingers, weird head, but I guess maybe that's why The Tinker can pose as a person because they're humanoid enough. I don't know, but interesting. So we'll keep moving on here. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, so here we go. So some more Spidey, and again more red and black Spidey. So even in the dark, we can see there's blue. There's plenty of blues being used in the book, but when he's in the dark, the parts of his costume that aren't red are being continued to be rendered in solid black. So again, more food for my theory of black and red Spider-Man. So possible there. Um, some cool ads. Interesting action here. So we got the grid again because things are starting to pick up and move. On both these pages, I found it. I like some of these poses. Mostly like these two at the top are really interesting. Spider-Man's fighting style because of the way that he can move and contort uh, and move his body around. He has this really interesting contortion with a one leg up, but the opposite arm way down, a fist coming up, and aliens flying off all over. Using his agility to jump around and get to the ceiling, and just really kind of cool stuff in terms of some early storytelling. Not quite as dynamic as what we would see today, but still really interesting in its own way. So that's there. I like this. So first of all, I thought it was interesting. Like, why would you have a trap, like a holding cell? You're supposed to be. These aliens are trying to take over the world using radio technology, I guess. But for some reason, they've built a little holding cell just in case. But they're secret. Why would they ever capture anybody? I don't. Okay. But here, this is really neat. He's going to use his web shooter in a way that we haven't seen yet. Meaning he's going to shoot a very thin, constrained shots line to try to push a button to release him. Whereas before, it's always been more of a spread. It's a net. It's a rope, but it spreads out, for him to swing on, whatever. This is like a single hard thread, and I like this here where it shows us the working mechanisms of how his web shooter works. So it's around his wrist. He has his cartridges of web fluid. The spray nozzle is adjustable, so he's got that. So he's like, okay, I'm going to adjust it to be this fine. So that explains how he can do so many different things with his web shooters. And then the palm switch, which again, you think about any other superhero, that is so unique to Spider-Man, that pose. And if you go like this, and if you add the sound effects, boy, the thwit, 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 everybody knows who that is. Kids, adults of all ages, people know, what are you doing? I'm shooting spider webs. Like Spider-Man, it's so interesting, unique, and we see it right here. So fascinating that it's there from the beginning and just a super holdover and something that really makes this character stand out. So I really like that and wanted to point that out. Let's see. Oh, this punch at the bottom panel of this page. Again, very cool choice, right? We could have seen all of Spidey punching, but in essence, he's so close to us. He's behind the camera, if you will, if you're pretending that this is a camera. And all we see is that fist coming through and then the aliens flying backwards. It gives us great depth. We have a lot more depth because the fist is closer. The aliens are overlapping. They're overlapping the device behind them that is catching on fire. So nice way of adding depth, but in a very small panel with a small amount of space. And you don't have to draw the whole figure to show something interesting or to show that depth and space. Just that hand, we know exactly who that is and what's going on. There's no doubt about it. Let's see here. The punch. This is again storytelling how's he going to wrap things up, the smoke. Kind of neat to show, like, as things are getting out of control, there's flame and smoke, and you can't even see the figures. They're just, shadows through that. Same here. Nice flames in the foreground, smoke. Spidey looks enveloped, very tight, very enclosed in all that. So he gets out of the skylight and takes off. And the aliens say, "Well, we're thwarted, so we're gonna take off." So they take off. Everything gets wrapped up, and things again seem to be pretty good, which is very unique for a Spider-Man comic. Usually, there's some sort of a thread. There's something wrong. Now, he does feel bad that he maybe wasn't able to save the Tinkerer, I should say, but he has the mask, which is gross to think about. So he was an alien that had a mask on to pose as a human, and look at this thing. So what? So Peter's saying, like, he can't tell anybody. Nobody will believe him. How would he explain that he, as Peter Parker, knows what happened, but he somehow kept this really horrific, lifelike skin mask? Ew. It's horrible, right? So I just thought that was really funny from a storytelling perspective. Like, why he could have said the same things without having this gross mask. What did he do? Does he throw it away? Does he burn it? Is it hidden in a trunk in his room for the rest of his life? Like, it's horrible. So there we go. So, and that's the end. Next issue, and then you have some ads here at the end in the back cover, and that's all there is to it. So those are the two stories that we find here in issue number 2 of The Amazing Spider-Man. So let's get back here and we'll wrap things up. So I hope you enjoyed that look at issue 2 of Amazing Spider-Man. Again, we've seen some really neat things in just a couple of issues in terms of the lore and the character of Spider-Man. A lot, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the framework and the things that have carried through all the history of the character are still there. The relationship with Aunt May, the loss of Uncle Ben, the photography aspect, and J. Jonah Jameson thinking he's going to take advantage of this kid, but the kid, he's really taking advantage of Jonah because he's taking pictures of himself, right? The elements of the science, Peter using his science as much as his superpowers, or using them together to stop his foes. The element of the belt and the utility package, and then his web shooters failing him sometimes when he needs them the most. All that stuff was there as early as issue number 2. So really speaks to the forethought of Stan as well as Steve. So last thing I want to wrap up on for anybody who's not aware of this is this thing that's called the Marvel method that came out of these early days of Marvel Comics. So in the early days, basically you had Stan Lee. He was pretty much the writer for all of these comics that we know as from the early days of Marvel. So Thor, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Iron Man, Captain America, the Avengers, the X-Men, you name it, right? All these things were written by Stan. So for him to sit down and write what we would think of today as a full script, and a full script would be along the lines of like a script you would get for a play or a movie where it has full descriptions. This, so for example, so Amazing Spider-Man might say page 1, splash page, high above the city, the Vulture and Spider-Man are battling. Page 2, opening scene, establishing shot, this building from above. So you're giving the artist every detail you want. It's a full description. What Stan ended up coming up with is what today is known as the Marvel method, where essentially the plot of the story is written out. So we know how many pages we have to go with. So here's how we're going to do it. So the story is the Vulture shows up, robs some stuff, gets away. Spidey is alerted through the news. he then keeps an eye out. He gets defeated by the Vulture in their first battle. He then goes home, uses his scientific knowledge to help him, and then he's going to defeat the Vulture. And that might be it. That's the whole description. And then he and Steve Ditko, in theory, would talk about, okay, how do we do it? So that's where the idea of the water tower comes in. Or, what if he had a belt and he had extra cartridges on his belt and stuff? Oh yeah, let's do that. And then Steve Ditko would draw it. So Steve is adding a whole element of storytelling in the artwork that isn't there in Stan's writing. The background. What does J. Jonah Jameson's office look like? How is the Vulture moving? That loop around where he flies around and kicks Spidey in the back of the head. How would he do that? Steve Ditko is the one that comes up with that and how people are going to move. And then those pages would go back to Stan and he would script them, meaning based on what the panel looks like. So Spidey's getting kicked in the face. He's not going to go, he's not going to say something like, hey, Vulture, your time is up. He's going to go, oh, kicking is, dirty pool. How would you do that? Or, whatever. But Stan's scripts would be reflective of the art after the art was done, as opposed to the script being a precise, direct way that the art had to be created to match the script. And that's the Marvel method. So the point of all this is, yes, Stan wrote this, and again, all the framework, or a lot of the framework of what we think of as Spider-Man is there, but a lot of that is being brought in by Steve Ditko as well, with his storytelling and the elements that he's bringing in the way that he's drawing it. So it truly is a magic collaboration that has brought us the Spider-Man that we know through all versions of media, be it comics, books, literature, movies, television, animation, video games, merchandise, toys, etc., etc. All comes from these two guys and their collaborative vision for who and this hero and how he should work, and who is my personal favorite hero. So thank you all for watching the video. I hope you enjoy it. If you did, please like the video, give it a thumbs up. That helps me out a lot. I really appreciate it. If you're seeing this video for the first time and you're not familiar with any of my other videos, please do take a look. I talk a lot about various art projects that I'm working on, but I also have videos talking about art techniques and tools for new or younger artists who are maybe looking to figure out, how do you draw comics? How does this work? I have a number of those kinds of videos as well. I'll continue to hopefully run with this series and get you forward to issue 3, which will be technically episode 4 of this retrospective, as well as videos updating you about all the upcoming projects that I have as an artist going on. So please subscribe, like the video, leave comments. I do check the comments and look through them. I appreciate all the feedback. It means a great deal to know that you are enjoying the content. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again for the next video. Thanks.